Excellent. Okay, it's 11:02, so time to get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandra Matheson, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer of Pillr. And I'm delighted you've all joined us for today's Pillr Presents webinar alongside our partner, DiamondIT. So a bit of context, we launched Pillr Presents at the start of 2023. Our goal is to use this as a virtual space for folks to come together and connect while learning about some of today's most pressing cybersecurity topics. And I'm really excited that you've joined us for today's session. It's an intriguing one: unexpected IT security threats and how to take them on. So without further ado, let me introduce our hosts, Pillr CSO Adam Gray and Technical Service Manager Cody Cooper of DiamondIT. Cody, I'm going to hand it off to you so you can start your interview with Adam.
Excellent. Thank you, Alexandria. I appreciate it. Adam, good morning, sir. Appreciate you taking the time to join us today. So unexpected IT security threats. Broad topic, I think. There's often a lot of things that happen throughout the news and throughout the world every day that we are often surprised by in security. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to just join us today and kind of go through some of this. So I think we should start off with just sort of the state of IT. And one of the things that has sort of started cropping up on radar in the recent years has been both the term vulnerabilities and then specifically around browser extensions and sort of what all of that means. Malicious browsers have sort of led to data breaches, they've led to financial loss, they've led to reputational damage. And so as we go through and we navigate the cyber landscape, I suppose you could call it, in the coming years, what are vulnerabilities, Adam, and maybe what are browsers and what are browser extensions?
Sure. So I think at a high level, the first place to really dig in is what's changed in our past and what we used to deal with to bring us up to speed. So if you think about computing, even 10 years ago or 15 and even back 20 years ago, most of what we operated on and most of what we ran on was collections of independent applications on computer systems. So you needed to run a task, you opened a particular application to run a task. And between the early 2000s and current, the number of applications that you specifically run on your system has not grown, it's shrunk. You do more in a web browser now than you ever have in the past. And so with that, a couple things have sort of come into play that are problematic. One is because you're more dependent on web browsers, there's more focus on them from a security perspective, both good and bad. Two is that in that space, over the past several years, you've had less choice in the number of web browsers that you use. And anytime you build a monoculture, a failure in one has large cascading effects. So if you go back, say, a half a dozen to a dozen years ago, we had lots and lots of web browsers. You had Netscape still existed, Microsoft's Internet Explorer still existed, and a number of others from a choice perspective. And a couple of things that we've seen is most of the browsers that are being used today are one of a couple of browser engines under the hood, even if they're branded differently, right? You might run Microsoft Edge, you might run Chrome. Under it all, those are really the same browser with just some different logos on the top of them. And so this background and this history of having less browsers to run and more of your daily life operating out of a browser has led to it being the focal point from a security perspective to what's happening now and kind of will continue to happen in the future. And we'll dig into some of that as we go along. But ultimately, the state of that means there's more focus there, and there's more opportunity for problems. Your banking, your news, all of those things come via either a browser or a wrapped application that's actually just accessing web data these days.
Well,
So
the
that's sort
browser's
of
like sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Adam, but the browser's sort of like the window to the internet, right? So everything you do online goes
Yes.
through that browser.
Yes. And ultimately, bigger than just the window to the internet, they've also become very complex. So you have nearly the same complexity in a browser as you have in some full operating systems now. And so when you look at kind of the view and how you should think about your web browser, you should think about it as the main interface in your computer these days, and that almost everything you do happens inside that browser. And so that brings us to what are browser extensions, which are essentially add-ons or applications that you allow to run inside your web browser to extend the functionality of it, right?
Yeah, and these are permutated throughout every enterprise, right? Every organization has browsers, and almost all of them have browser extensions installed in some fashion, I would say. Is that accurate?
In some fashion, yes. The goal or the idea of what that looks like is definitely different in different organizations, right? And I would argue that not controlling or ignoring that space will lead to significant risk, right? So one of the things I think that we'll talk about as we go through is how do you tell good from bad? What should you be thinking about when you consider a browser extension? What are the areas of concern as it relates to that? And then, what are some of the problems happening in that space? Right. So from a high level intro, browser extensions can be good, they can be bad, and unfortunately, more and more of them are showing up as bad these days.
Okay, so as I look at the enterprise environments throughout all of our clients, one of the things that's really stood out to me is there's sort of 3 or 4 primary browsers, like you were saying, Adam, and then there's usually what I see are primary extensions. I often see shopping and coupons, I think, are the low-hanging fruit that many people sometimes accidentally install. But there's also good ones, benign ones, password managers, things that analyze between, say, QuickBooks and your email. So there's certainly a business need in some cases for browser extensions. Can you touch on real quick vulnerabilities in general? Are browser extensions vulnerabilities? Is every browser extension a vulnerability?
No. So every browser extension has a set of rules associated to it that are basically the things it's allowed to do. And what happens when you develop a browser extension is those rules are dictated by the person who wrote the browser extension, which seems a little odd. Having the fox watch the hen house is definitely the model that browsers run off of. So the first thing to think about when you think about a browser is, what is the purpose of this extension? And do I have a business need to operate this extension? Right, so that's the first thing I want to think about, even before I look at like, what is it allowed to do? I always want to look at, is there a business need for this? And one of the first areas of determining that is, what is it built for? Do I need a coupon clipping browser extension to operate my business?
Mhm.
Probably no.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Probably no. The second thing I want to think about in this is, and this kind of gets to the vulnerability side of it is if I install this piece of software and really truly think about a browser extension as an application you're putting into your computer. If I install this application, will it add more risk to my environment than by not having it? Right, so that's sort of step two for me, and sometimes that's going to be hard to determine the risk. Right, there's definitely issues with any piece of software, and mostly from an end user's perspective, having the ability to evaluate risk is going to be really hard. Right, that's where you're probably going to want to reach out to somebody has more experience, more capabilities, more knowledge, and say, hey, what do you think about running this? Right, we definitely have those conversations, and I know you and I have had those conversations over the past year or so of what does this risk look like. And for us, that risk is evaluated in a few key ways. The first way we look at it is who's developing the application. And really, truly, I mean who, like where is it developed? What country is it built in? What are the operating controls around it? Do we think that vendor has the capability to defend itself against a nation state? Do they have privacy policies that meet the guidelines that we would expect? Are they running in a country where it's a friendly country to the US or hostile? All of those factors build up sort of a model for risk. And then do they have a good track record of keeping their software up to date? And there's some low-hanging fruit in that space of companies that have struggled to keep their software up to date, right? Like most notably is probably Adobe. Their past decade has been littered with a horrendous set of problems, and they've struggled to have good software updates, et cetera. But they're very popular tools.
Certainly, everyone has heard of Adobe, right?
Everyone has heard of Adobe.
Yeah.
Not everybody outside of the security community knows that they have had significant struggles and issues. And they're a big company and they work hard at it, but they still struggle to have significant struggles and issues. If you want, I can share my screen and I can just show a few things.
Yeah, let's let everyone see.
Jump over and let's see.
And I think it's important too, when we talk about what these extensions can do, they can be large companies like Adobe. They can be companies that you've never heard of before. And one of the things that I want to make clear too, Adam, right, is we're not expecting the end user to go out and identify these things, right? We're not expecting the end user to go research who made it.
No,
but that's why we're here, right?
Yeah. These are questions you ask. These are questions you ask Diamond. These are questions that come up that we have conversations on if there are unknowns. But so this is a scanner that DiamondIT has access to and that they use as part of their tooling and their customers' controls. But this is the Adobe Acrobat PDF, and ultimately what you probably want to focus on is this area in the bottom, which is the list of vulnerabilities, when they were discovered, the year, the number on the vulnerability is sequential for the year. So you can see that this was the 11,358th of the year for 2019 across all software vendors, and that it has a medium risk and just under a 3 of an impact. Basically, what that means is that there have been discovered problems in a piece of software that Adobe embeds inside its browser extension since 2019 that they have not updated. And this is pretty common, but this would be enough for me to say, probably don't want that on a business machine that processes data that I care about. And quite honestly, browsers know how to read PDFs natively these days. So maybe I don't need a browser extension built specifically on top of a function I already have in what I'm doing. Right. So when we talk about vulnerabilities, this is sort of step one for us is does a browser extension have more risk to it than by not running that, and do I need that function as a business tool? And that's step one.
Step one, got it. Okay.
Yep. So when we look at these, this isn't even about, hey, this is malware, this is going to be bad for my environment. This is just simply when I'm deciding to run a piece of software in an environment, is this the right thing to run or not? And I would argue that I'm very risk adverse in these things, so no, probably not the right one for me to operate. When you take it a step from there, then we start talking about browser extensions that, we talked about the permissions a browser extension has. And permissions are interesting in browser extensions. So if I go out and I say I'm going to look at the browser extension Honey, this is a browser extension that is used for coupons and rewards. It also fails. So here are the things that it can do from a connection perspective on your computer, and I'll explain what these are and why they're important. But ultimately, this browser extension can make requests to the internet on your behalf. It can block the requests that you make to the internet through your browser. So you type something in, you type something into search, you type in a URL, it can block it and make a new one for you. It can read every site you visit on the internet and have access to all of the authentication data. So everything that you talk to on the internet, it can read and see. And these two here mean that it can send the data and interact with the data anywhere on the internet. So when you look at a site like this, basically it reads your requests, it can block your requests, it can fill new requests in for you, and it can read everything you do on a browser and send that anywhere it wants on the internet.
And this is not just when I'm looking for coupons, right? This is every website I visit, even when I'm not shopping, for example.
Anytime it's installed in the browser, it's active and running.
Got it. Okay, so if I go to my banking website, Honey, the browser extension for shopping and coupons, will see the information that I'm typing in and receiving. Got it. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, all of it.
And that would sort of imply the importance behind who develops these extensions. I would suggest, right?
Yes. Yeah. And whether you want that group specifically to have access to the data that you're that you have. I mean, that ultimately their entire business model is to collect and advertise directly back to you, right? Their whole business model is built on that. And when I look at others out there, you also have groups like Rakuten, like
ransomware group, right?
Yeah, but they're also a cash back for shopping group as well. So you have vulnerabilities now, and you have permissions issue in these. So these are problems where now I've got a library with a known vulnerability built into it, and I have the same level of data theft happening.
So what does that mean? So even if the extension itself was clean or benign, you're saying it has a vulnerability and it has permissions to all these things on my machine. What can someone do with that information?
So if you browse the wrong site now and I call that data library, I can now parse all of that data based on your permissions and take it from you.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So those kinds of things become problematic, and not always, but this is definitely, you know, a problem, and this is, you know, there are specific libraries for data parsing and validating, and you know, there are issues applied to these. This one looks like a denial of service attack, but the same type of vulnerabilities and permissions exist in these, where read your cookies, make requests, block requests, and this one is all URLs. And all URLs is a little deceiving in web browsers. What that means is all protocols and all URLs. So you can send it over any protocol you want now too, not just web-based ones, but anything that you do through a browser.
So you've got benign extensions that have permissions but may not have vulnerabilities. You can use them, but you need to be aware of who's made it, where that information is going, if you want them to have that kind of information. But then on top of it, Adam, to increase my stress and anxiety level as I browse the internet, you're telling me that not only do the extensions have these permissions, they may also have vulnerabilities on top of it. So even if the extension itself were benign or innocent or good, somebody could exploit the vulnerability. Got it.
Yep.
Well,
and so
yeah.
So in general, when I think about, you know, these things, I tend to have like a set of categories of stuff that probably shouldn't make it into any web browser. And when I look at those, and we're not even to malware yet. These are legitimate businesses. I don't really want to participate in many of these businesses because their whole model is to harvest your data to sell to others, right? And in return, they give you a discount on what you're doing. And some of them are more, I'd say, nebulous than that. They're not great, but that is the basic model. The next category beyond just like the coupon ones, you know, there are lots and lots of these that have this type of issue though. So if I think about coupons as one, ad blockers tends to be another one that has a lot of misuse in it. And unfortunately, they're very popular.
I was going to say, I use ad blocker every day. Don't destroy my confidence in my ad blocker, Adam.
You know, they're not great.
They're not.
They're not. Unfortunately, the ad blockers all have, like, if you know, and I'll just type in ad blocker. I'm not going to go pick on too many of them specifically, but like if I type in ad blocker, anything that shows ad blocker will show up in here. So here's ad blocker ultimate. I don't know, this one, it's got vulnerabilities built into it from 2017 that have not been updated. It's got all kinds of issues, and it has the exact same permissions that our coupon stuff had, in that it can send your data and interact with anything on the internet. It can block requests on your behalf and make requests on your behalf. Now, sometimes this is necessary. So in order to block an ad, we also have to know what you're browsing and deal with it. So it's an appropriate piece of technology to have those permissions, but then it just comes down to the question of, do you trust the group that you're you know, that you've put this in with to maintain your security? And then when I look at those pieces, then that is like, okay, who owns the company that I'm going to go look at, right? If I take one of the ad blockers that are out there, you start to have that conversation of, all right, this is AdBlock Plus. They're mentioned on TechCrunch, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. Just so we're clear, that doesn't make them good. You know,
Sure.
many items are mentioned on all of those, sometimes good, sometimes bad. What you will notice though is if I go look at the about, it's distinctly devoid of who is running this and why are they running it. You know, managed by an independent committee. You know, all of this sounds great, but there isn't a lot of detail in their site about what they are or who they are. I can go look at the source code of this. So this is something that we do on the back end as we go dig in and say, what does it look like to operate the source code and how many groups are out there? And this is the source code to AdBlock Plus, which is great that they produce this. You know, and that it's available, but it still doesn't give you a ton of information about the organization. We still don't really have a good key. So oftentimes what we'll do is go look at the copyrights, and copyrights are great because it's a registered trademark of IO GmbH. Well, now we have to go look at who this group is, because this is really the owner of that technology. And we have to start to look at, do we trust where this group operates? And one of the ways to dig into that, and one of the things that is, you know, interesting in this space is to go look at it from a LinkedIn perspective, because LinkedIn is somewhat hard to find, somewhat hard to hide from.
Yeah.
So you got 227 employees on a particular ad block, and I can click on the people and see, what are we dealing with here? What countries are we operating out of, and is that appropriate for my data? So pretty much all of their employees are German. That's not the worst for organizations. Germany's got a good long history of good security software and good developers, yes, and, you know, interests that align with US corporations. You know, there would be much worse answers in that space, but it's also a concern that all of my data could go to another organization in another country that I don't really have much control or rights on. And so when I start to look at the ad blockers and I look at whether this is a corporation I would trust, those become a judgment call, right? If this was operating out of mainland China, there would be no judgment call. We would just say, no, you can't do that. Like, right, that doesn't operate. But you know, you have some gray areas in the world where they're not specifically U.S. interests, but they're not a detriment to U.S. interests either. So, you know, reasonable information to kind of look at and dig into. Now, absolutely, if I was operating in Germany, I'd probably be pretty happy about this and say, oh, okay, they're in my country, and you know, I can use this capability, and I know that they have to abide by the rules and the technology in the country I'm operating in. Right. So that's just one example of kind of how we look at the software world as a whole. And we're still not to malware, unfortunately.
I do think it's interesting that they will show the source code. They'll show the code so you can go and read and see everything that that program is doing. But unfortunately, that's in some ways a false sense of security, right? Because while you may see, oh, it's taking data and submitting data, where's that data going? It doesn't always tell you that in the code, right? What they're doing with it and such. So.
Yeah, it doesn't. And you also may not have the skill set to dig in
absolutely,
and read it. Yeah. That's one of the big issues, is that this is, I mean, just to build this software out, to take a look at it, takes significant expertise. And, you know, you dig into these and there is a significant amount of data to review. It's actually something that that we use a whole bunch of different techniques to review and look at these, right? It's easiest when I can simply exempt something. I can drop something off the list of okay to run it simply by the country of origin, right? That's always the easiest path. If we run a query on a piece of software and it comes back with significant risk from country of origin, then I don't have to look any further. We just simply say no.
Absolutely. Right? And this risk involving countries of origin, you receive that's put out by the State Department, right? We're not just randomly picking on countries. Yeah.
No, there are essentially our government has controls in place on country of origin where they say you should not operate these things. And they have on the reverse side controls in place to say, here are a handful of country of origin that we have significant influence with and have strong relationships and trust. And so in the US, that tends to be local US, Canada, UK, New Zealand, and Australia, right? Those are the five that have sort of strong, trusted relationships and what they share intelligence in the government agencies between, and they work as very close allies. Countries that would be just outside of that list might be Ireland and some of the EU countries and so forth. So there's sort of rings of how much are we going to trust, and then there's country of origin where it's like non-negotiable, not going to happen. Mainland China is probably the biggest. Operating tools that are built in Russia would also be the State Department would frown on these days. And so forth. And so there's a number of technologies that simply based on where they're developed, we're going to flag a high risk to and say, yeah, this is probably not something that is reasonable to do. Beyond that, then you're talking about reputation and history, right? So has the organization had significant problems with maintaining integrity of their data, right? So, you've got a privacy-focused group like DuckDuckGo, which was found out to be selling data.
Yeah. Yes.
So probably, they're going to have a little lower reputation for a while in that they had some issues with saying that they were privacy focused and then selling data and being fined for selling data.
Yes, for those who don't know, DuckDuckGo was a search engine that promised to never record or collect any information of what you did online. And unfortunately, that was found not to be the case. So
not to be the case.
Yeah.
So you also had, you also have groups that run into file trouble or financial trouble and sell data when they get or ads or others. So like there's a tool out there for transferring files back and forth called FileZilla, and it used to be a perfectly legitimate piece of software, and at some point they got into financial trouble and they turned into an ad network. And so you have those types of things. So internally, when we look at browser extensions, these are all the things that start to go into it. And once you get beyond that, then you start to run into the malware side of the house. So significant ugliness. And in general, when we're hunting for malware, we like to look at first the permissions that you've told the browser to have. right? So that's always something that we're going to start with when we're looking for malware is what's the browser permissions look like and what's happening in that space. So I'll show a couple things. I just heard my UPS click over, so let's hope I don't have significant power problems. But we are on batteries, but I just heard it click on and off a couple times. All right. So when we start with a set of malware, and I'm going to log in. I'm going to show some back-end stuff, just kind of behind the scenes.
Adam,
Every
real quick,
browser,
just to make sure everyone understands real quick, malware, we're talking malicious software.
Oh yeah, bad software. Things that are meant to steal data, not just your ad network data, but things that are meant to just absolutely lift everything off your computer.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So, and sometimes, so when people think malware, they mostly think, crypto miners and other stuff these days, or having a ransomware attack. That's what most people think about malware.
Sure.
Malware is a very broad category. It can do lots of things, everything from siphon data off slowly over time to encrypt your file system and make it so that you can't operate, right? And everything in between. When we think about malware and when we look for malware in a browser, the first thing that we're always looking at is what does the browser extension do, right? So that's sort of the first one. And then beyond what it does, where is it getting its updates from, right? And browser extensions can come from the Chrome store, so you can log into the Chrome store and find them, or they can be sideloaded. They can just simply show up in an environment, and there may not be details about how the software got there.
So are you suggesting that it doesn't require an administrative privilege to install these, or?
It does not.
Okay.
It does not. And they can, software in a browser can be synchronized between your Google accounts or your Microsoft accounts if you're using their browser. So if I'm using Google Chrome at home and I log into Gmail and I have a piece of malware embedded into a browser extension that I don't know about that I've installed on my home computer, either via the store or some side-loaded process, like I installed a game and it put it on, or I installed some other piece of software and it laid it down and I didn't know about it. It will synchronize to the cloud using either Google or Microsoft, depending on your browser. And then when you go to your work computer and you log into that Gmail account because you want to check your home email, it will synchronize that malware and that browser extension onto your work computer.
Perfect. So now I have it in both places.
Yes. Yep. The browser has enough capability to understand what it is and understand how to replicate itself and all of the things you might want, both good and bad.
Okay.
So when we look at browser extensions from a malware perspective, we always like to start with, and I'm going to pull up some back-end stuff and just kind of show a few things real quick. This is inside the SOC, some of the tools that we use. And what this is this is just browser extensions with the name PDF in them. This is where I started, and I'm going to show some specific examples. So one of the things we look at is what are our permissions, right? We saw these over here when I look at the various permissions of what something can do, and we look for excessive permissions. One of the other things we often look for is browser extensions that are not updated from Google, right? So I'm gonna filter out just all the Google stuff real quick. And it's interesting that, you might have valid ones like Adobe's Acrobat that decided to not deploy its browser extension through the store, but through the installation of Acrobat, right? That might be okay for the moment, but we can kind of do some filtering and see what we got and look at it. And then,
so the idea, Adam, right now is, so I downloaded a browser extension from either Adobe or from the Google Store if I'm using Chrome. And now that I'm looking for updates to this software, I ought to see those updates come from Adobe or come from Google Chrome.
You would like that. Yep.
Yeah.
That would be one of the things that would be good. It doesn't always happen that way, and there are reasons why it doesn't. Like Microsoft decided at one point to not use the Google Store to distribute some of their data sets. And the reason they decided to was because they wanted to push out functions and features and did not want approval processes from Google to be in the way. And it is a valid, if you're a large enough vendor, in some ways, that is valid and it does happen.
Well-known names that probably everyone on this call has heard of, for example.
Yes, yes. In general, when we hunt for malware, one of the things we look for is no update URLs, a very generic name with very excessive permissions, right? And this is absolutely malware that is tied into this. This is continuing to be an ongoing issue in the space, but very quickly, every time I pull this data up, we see computers that are still running it, still operating it. And as we onboard more organizations, we see this type of problem come up, which is somebody installed a piece of software along the line that decided to install a out-of-band browser extension that has a innocuous general name to it.
Sure, PDF viewer.
PDF viewer that really has nothing to do with those pieces, unfortunately. And what this is actually doing is siphoning all of the browser data and all of your web data off of a computer to malicious sources. So not unlike your coupon codes, except this is an organization using it to resell your data and to redirect you to areas. So this is one that we saw that if you ran a search in Amazon for an item, they would redirect you to the item that they wanted you to buy, not the one that you wanted. Right?
Well, that's handy for them, I suppose.
It's very handy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very handy. And when we dug into this one, here's some background on it, but when we dug into this one, we found 61 different extensions operating the exact same set of code across 27 domains in the internet. So lots and lots and lots of search keywords, things they're looking for, specific sites. They're looking for dating information, for all kinds of things that were in here, and they basically suck out all that data and process it on their side. And if you look at the names of the extensions, they all look pretty innocuous. They all look pretty straightforward, but they're all pretty much the same, as in this is just malware. And they're all redirecting all of your data to all of this different infrastructure on the internet.
Whew. So, Adam, now that you've increased my blood pressure by quite a bit, I think the thought now that I'm thinking is, how do we identify if I have these in my environment?
So the first thing that I would think about as an organization is putting controls in place to not allow browser extensions to be installed by a user, right? So physical software controls along with policy controls to say, listen, if you want to modify a corporate computer, you need to have specific permission and the software to be checked out and looked at. Right. So in our own organization, I want to say there's 5 or 6 browser extensions that are approved and all others are denied. So we have an implicit deny rule of like, you're not allowed to put a browser extension on unless it is explicitly approved. And that list is very, very, very short.
Now, and I'm sure the answer is different for each organization, but would it be fair to say that your guys' business hasn't been degraded because of your lack of extensions?
I mean, I think that if you asked my users, they'd probably answer differently. They would say, we want our extensions.
Yeah.
But there's a trade-off, right? I have to maintain a different level of security than other organizations. So I think there's definitely a trade-off in this space for that, and there's also risk that you have to consider when you're looking at this stuff, right? Like, how likely is your user to experience phishing and compromise, right? So that's one of the things, right? So if I go look over and throw in my email address and I look at it, I'm going to get a set of data back on all of the places that my data has been stolen from over the years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So, number of chunks of data. Adobe's lost my data. Dropbox has lost my data. LinkedIn's lost my data. So there's enough here, and some of these are spam producers that just happen to have an email address. So when we think about this stuff in a larger platform, there's risk to an individual user in how likely is their data to end up out there. And then there's organizational risk of what kind of data do you process as an organization, and how concerned am I with that data?
Okay, so then what I'm hearing then is the first step to sort of try and prevent this, or at least mitigate some of this risk, is to lock down the environments in a way that prevents all browser extensions from being installed, except for the ones that have been sort of vetted and approved. For the people who are maybe on this call and they're interested and they're wondering, I wonder what kind of extensions I have in my environment. Is there a way to gather those or collect those and sort of screen them, or?
Yeah, so part of that's going to be if you have software inventory tools, they're going to be there. If you're a very small organization, simply looking at the toolbar that's up there. So like you can see, I have 3 extensions. I've got a password manager, I've got OneNote from Microsoft, and I've got an agent for Pillr.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the entirety of my extension list.
Now, sometimes there might be vulnerabilities in the extensions, right? Like we've been talking about. Can we provide assessments and go through and provide vulnerability scanning? Is there a way that we can sort of provide these things to IT departments or to organization stakeholders? Okay.
Yeah, so within the Pillr side of the platform, that's something that I know you and I have been able to provide those details back. So if somebody says, hey, what are they running, we can give a complete list of every machine and every extension and where they're installed and what they look like and what the permissions are, and hey, is that okay or not, and provide specific guidance. Outside of what we're doing, if it's a small organization, it's probably best to just go spot check and take a quick look. And inside the, inside of groups that are already, Pillr customers with you, this is stuff that we can we report on when we have malware, but we will provide guidance on if asked.
Of course. Okay. And that's really good. Is there, again, sort of switching topics slightly, as you look at security, it's really hard to know where your organization stands today, because we talked about browser extensions in terms of vulnerabilities, but browser extensions, they're just one part of vulnerabilities, right? There's much
tiny.
more.
They're just one little piece of what's wrong in an environment. So, the blocking and tackling of an organization is really specific. And when you think about what you have to do, there are a set of controls out there that are put out by CIS, and that's an organization that's built to build out the controls for security. And these are top-down controls. And this is something that I know that you and I've talked a lot about over the last couple of years. And these are critical. And they're in order of importance. So you have to be good at control 1 and 2 and 3 before you move on to 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And you can see vulnerability management is down here in 7. And the reason it's here in 7 and not before is that if you don't have good control of your assets and of your software assets, you can't possibly have good control of vulnerability management, because that requires changes in configuration and updates and patches to be applied to those assets, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
you have to know what you have first, right, before you can fix it.
Yes, and you are almost certainly going to have security issues and problems if you are not reasonably mature in most of these. And what I often see is people jump down to control 18 in pen testing, hoping to do the discovery and the findings for all of the other controls. And that's just not really how it's supposed to work, right? This is supposed to be the final checklist of, hey, did I get the other 17 things right? And are we in pretty good shape? So when I talk to organizations and groups about, this was specific about browsers, that's just one little tiny piece that rolls for controls 1, 2, 3, 4, a little bit of 5 and 6 and 7, right? And a chunk of 9. So it has little bits of pieces across all the beginnings of these controls. And then ultimately the monitoring and the recovery stuff on the malware defenses tends to be sort of the check that you had the rest of these handled so far.
And this is why they call security a journey, I suppose, instead of a destination.
Yeah, it is for sure. Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not a short-term fix, and it requires continued diligence, right? It's something that you're going to continue to work on. If you stay where you're at today, and you don't continue to work on it, you're actively getting worse. Because
what do you mean? Yeah, unpack that for me.
Because so if I only do the thing that I've done today, the attackers and the issues are going to continue to get worse and worse and worse out there, and harder and harder and harder. And I'll give you a quick example of kind of where things are going and why it's that way. So we've had tons and tons and tons of news on ChatGPT, right?
Yeah. Yes. ChatGPT is a artificial intelligence model that's a chat program that is supposed to mimic a human.
Yeah. All right. Good. Okay. This is Model 4, which is not out completely in the public yet. You can get paid access to it. And this is vulnerable software, right? So stuff that you can do testing with and look at and other things in here. So I'm gonna go find, here's a format string. So this is written in C.
Just a small piece of code, essentially.
Small piece of code that has specific problems in it. Okay.
For those who don't know, ChatGPT is fairly advanced to the point where you can ask it to program something and it will program it for you.
I'm gonna stop generating. Sometimes you have to trick these. I have some screenshots if not, because I did this yesterday with it. It may or may not. Yeah, here we go. So I gave it code. It tells me there are a number of vulnerabilities in it. Tells me what it is.
With examples, yeah.
Yeah. And this is where things are headed, right? So this is, and I'm gonna leave you with this. We have 2 minutes left, and I think I'm gonna hit right on the nose for this.
Man, that is impressive what ChatGPT can do.
Yeah, well, this is what's gonna terrify you of where we're headed. So these are all the problems it found in it, right? It's almost done writing examples. Of the problems. And when it finishes, I'm going to ask it to write an exploit for me.
What do you mean by that, write an exploit?
I'm going to ask it to give me code to break one of these and do bad things to a computer. So if you were running this code that I put in and I said, hey, tell me where the problems are, and it said, hey, here are the potential problems in the code, I can then come back to it and say, could you write me an exploit to take advantage of one of those problems and take over the whole computer?
So this is sort of implying to me, Adam, that if someone, say even a high school student, could come in here and just use ChatGPT to make malware for them.
Yeah. Can you show me an example of an exploit for this? I did this yesterday with it. It doesn't like, you have to like cajole it to get it right. But yes. I'll pull a screenshot up for you on one that I did on this very topic yesterday. We just did this. And if you work a little bit at it, it eventually will write it for you and give you all of the details back. So in the end, it will certainly just build the entire piece for you and say, this is how you take advantage of it, and this is what it looks like when you're all finished.
You're right, you did scare me. So thank you for keeping me up tonight, Adam, I appreciate it.
Here you go. Boom. So this is what we had it did. So here's a sample of the exploit, print 4 addresses from the stack, run the app, exploit it to this, do this, and off you go. Yeah. So that's what we typed in yesterday.
No real skill needed.
Not really. You just have to know how to work with the AI tool to get it to do what you want in a reasonable amount of time. Okay. So with that, that's what we're up against.
Yeah. Okay. You know, I think, Adam, that we're, despite the difficulties of the challenge and the ever conflicting war on cybersecurity in general, what I'm hearing though is through all of this, there are tools that we can use to sort of mitigate these. There are tools to identify our risk, tools to mitigate that risk if possible. I won't say remove, but mitigate.
Yep.
And it almost seems like as long as your organization is putting security and the culture of security at the forefront as a priority, moving things forward, having some sort of IT department that provides security services to their employees and is diligent about staying current, you can mitigate most of these risks. Or how scared do I need to be right now when I leave this webinar?
You can be in pretty good shape, right? So it takes real work, real effort, real time, and training of both the IT staff and the user staff, and people have to be pointed in the same direction, and your risks go down significantly. Ignoring those or making exceptions to rules will lead to disaster though, right? Saying,
Yeah.
oh, I don't need two-factor, I'm not going to click on anything bad.
Yes, yes. As part of this, we are offering to everyone who's in this webinar a free vulnerability scan. For those of you who are interested, we will be reaching out next week to provide that for you guys. I know we're about out of time. Adam, thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate
Yeah, of course.
time. Are there any questions in chat at all? Alexandria or Samantha, have you guys seen any questions in chat at all? Or chat, if you have any questions, just go ahead and type it in real quick. We'll give you guys a few moments here. You know what's interesting? Oh, go ahead.
I'm not currently seeing any.
Okay. Okay.
But it's also a good time to let folks know that if something comes up after the fact, please do not hesitate to reach out to Cody or Adam, both of us, all of us, myself. We're happy to make sure that you have the answers you need.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, I suppose we can end here. Thank you everyone so much for your time today. Adam, thank you again. Alexandra, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming today. Hopefully it was informative.
Excellent. Thank you guys.
Adam.
Take care.